The envelope had arrived on a Tuesday, slipped beneath my apartment door while I slept. No postage. No return address. Just thick, cream-colored parchment that smelled faintly of roses and something darker. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up even before I broke the wax seal. Callum Archer, it read in elegant script that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. You are cordially invited to the autumn equinox banquet at Thornhaven Estate. Formal attire required. Midnight arrival. A car will be set. I should have thrown it away. I should have laughed it off as some elaborate prank from my university colleagues who knew I spent my weekends buried in folklore research and Gothic literature. But something about the weight of that paper, the precision of those letters, the way my name was written as if the author knew the exact rhythm of my heartbeat, it all felt terrifyingly real. I was a researcher after all. My dissertation focused on vampire mythology across European cultures, tracing the evolution of bloodlust narratives from medieval superstition to modern romantic fantasy. I'd spent 3 years analyzing texts, interviewing elderly villagers in Romania, photographing crumbling castle ruins in Transylvania. But I'd never believed. Not really. Vampires were metaphors, representations of plague, of aristocratic excess, of forbidden desire. They weren't real. The car arrived at 11:30, a sleek black vehicle that looked like it had driven straight out of the 1920s yet moved with impossible silence. The driver never spoke, never turned around, never acknowledged my nervous questions about where exactly we were going. We drove for what felt like hours through countryside I didn't recognize, past forests so dense they seemed to swallow the moonlight whole, until finally we turned down a lane lined with ancient oaks whose branches formed a tunnel overhead. Thornhaven Estate rose from the landscape like a fever dream made stone. It was a Gothic masterpiece, all soaring spires and gargoyle-studded towers, stained glass windows that glowed with warm light from within, massive wooden doors carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change when you looked at them too long. This wasn't some restored historical property turned boutique hotel. This was old. Ancient. The kind of old that predated records and reasonable explanation. My heart hammered as I climbed the stone steps. The doors opened before I could knock, revealing a grand entrance hall where dozens of other guests milled about in formal attire. They looked normal enough at first glance. Men in perfectly tailored suits, women in elegant gowns that ranged from classically timeless to daringly modern. But there was something off about all of them, something I couldn't quite name. Their movements were too fluid. Their skin too perfect. Their eyes too bright in the candlelight that illuminated the space with warm, golden radiance. A woman in a deep burgundy dress approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "First time?" she asked, her voice like honey poured over gravel. Yes, I managed. I'm not entirely sure why I'm here actually. The invitation. Oh, the invitation, she laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. How delightful. You're one of the mortals then. How brave of you to come. She leaned closer and I caught the scent of her perfume, roses and copper and something ancient. Word of advice, darling. Don't sit in any seat that has a red rose beside the plate. Those are reserved. Everything else is fair game. Before I could ask what she meant, a bell chimed, deep and resonant, vibrating through my chest like a second heartbeat. The crowd began moving toward a set of massive double doors that had just swung open, revealing a banquet hall that stole the breath from my lungs. The banquet hall defied physics and reason. It stretched impossibly far, yet somehow felt intimate. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet overhead, painted with murals that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight, scenes of ancient battles, moonlit forests, elegant figures dancing through centuries. Massive stone pillars carved with intertwining roses and thorns supported Gothic arches, each one lit by clusters of candles in ornate golden sconces. But it was the table that commanded attention. A single, enormous table ran the length of the hall, covered in midnight blue cloth embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like captured starlight. Place settings stretched in both directions, fine china painted with gold leaf, crystal glasses that refracted candlelight into rainbow prisms, silverware that looked sharp enough to be weapons. And everywhere were candles. Hundreds of them in tall candelabras, creating a warm golden glow that should have felt welcoming but instead felt like standing inside the belly of some beautiful, dangerous creature. The guests filed in with practiced ease, clearly familiar with the protocol I couldn't begin to guess at. I hung back, watching, trying to understand the social choreography playing out before me. There was a hierarchy here, I realized. The seats closer to the far end of the table, a raised section I could just make out through the crowd, those were taken first by the most elegant, the most graceful, the most unsettling of the attendees. I spotted the woman in burgundy taking a seat about midway down, and she caught my eye with an encouraging nod. There were indeed red roses placed beside certain settings. Not many, perhaps a dozen scattered along the table's length. Those seats remained conspicuously empty even as the hall filled. The smart thing would have been to sit near the entrance, in the most unremarkable, anonymous position possible. But I've never been accused of excessive wisdom, and my researcher's curiosity had fully engaged. I found myself drawn forward, moving through the crowd with my eyes fixed on those empty seats marked with roses. Who were they for? What made them special? And why did every vampire in the room, because I was now certain that's what they were, give those seats such a wide berth? The bell chimed again and the remaining guests rushed to find seats. In the sudden flurry of movement, I was pushed forward, jostled by bodies that felt too cold through their formal attire. I stumbled, caught myself on the back of a chair, and found myself at the raised section of the table. The head table, I realized with growing dread. There were 5 seats here, elevated slightly above the rest of the hall. For had red roses beside the plates. The center seat, larger than the others, throne-like in its carved wooden grandeur, was clearly meant for someone of supreme importance. To its right the first seat down was unmarked. No rose. Just an empty chair with the same fine place setting as everywhere else. In my confusion and the press of bodies finding their places, in the dimming of some candles and the brightening of others creating disorienting shadows, I made a choice that would alter the course of my existence. I sat down in that unmarked seat. The reaction was immediate and total. Every conversation in the hall ceased. Every movement froze. The silence that fell was so complete I could hear the candle flames crackling, could hear my own pulse thundering in my ears. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, and in that moment I understood what a rabbit feels when it realizes the rustling in the bushes is not the wind. "Oh," said a voice beside me, melodious and amused. "How very interesting." I turned my head, slowly because some instinct screamed at me not to make sudden movements, and found myself staring at the most beautiful and terrifying creature I had ever seen. She had materialized in the throne-like seat beside me, though I would have sworn it was empty just seconds before. Her hair fell in waves of deep red, not auburn or copper but the color of fresh blood in candlelight, dark crimson with lighter highlights that seemed to glow. Her skin was porcelain pale, flawless, luminous in a way that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with not having living blood flowing beneath it. And her eyes. God, her eyes. They were red. Not the pink of albinism or the brown red of certain lighting. Pure crimson irises that seemed to glow with their own internal light, fixed on me with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. She wore armor, actual armor, but armor like I'd never seen outside of museum displays or fantasy films. Blue-black metal plates shaped to her form with masterful craftsmanship, covering her torso and shoulders while allowing fluid movement. Beneath it, fabric that looked like silk but moved like living shadow. Intricate jewelry adorned her neck and ears, pieces that looked ancient and priceless, embedded with rubies that matched her eyes. And there, near her temple, I could see markings. Not tattoos but something that seemed carved or branded into her skin, arcane symbols that pulsed very faintly with red light. She was looking at me the way a cat looks at a bird that has just flown into its cage. "You," she said slowly, and her voice carried through the silent hall with perfect clarity, "are either the bravest human I have encountered in 3 centuries, or the most foolish." She tilted her head, studying me with those impossible eyes. I confess I'm not yet certain which. My mouth had gone dry. I tried to speak, failed, tried again. There was no rose. I thought. "No rose," she repeated, and a smile curved her lips, not friendly but not entirely cruel either. Intrigued, perhaps. No, there wouldn't be. This seat is not marked for a chosen guest. This seat is marked by its proximity to mine. This seat is for my consort. The word hung in the air like a blade about to fall. I don't have a consort, she continued, that smile widening to show teeth just a fraction too sharp to be human. I have never chosen one, despite considerable pressure from my family and court. I am Seraphina Drakenmore, third daughter of the Eternal King, Princess of the Northern Covens, Commander of the Crimson Guard, and the most decorated warrior in 600 years of vampire history. She leaned closer, and I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her like winter-made flesh. I have killed demons, humans, and other vampires in numbers that would break your mind to contemplate. I am called the Blood Rose, the Thorn Crown, the Death Maiden. I am, as your people might phrase it, not one to fuck with. She paused, her crimson eyes searching my face for something I couldn't name. And you, little mortal, have just sat in the seat reserved for whoever I choose to bond with for eternity. According to the ancient laws of our kind, laws older than your civilization, this constitutes a claiming. You have, quite literally, seated yourself in the position of my intended. That dangerous smile returned. Congratulations, Callum Archer. You're engaged. The hall remained frozen in that terrible silence for what felt like hours but could only have been seconds. Then, like a spell-breaking sound rushed back in, gasps, whispers, a few nervous laughs, and from somewhere near the back, a single pair of hands beginning to clap. Others joined in, and within moments the entire hall erupted in applause that felt more like mockery than celebration. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. My mind kept trying to process what Seraphina had just said, but the words slid away like water on glass. Engaged. Ancient laws. Claiming. None of it made sense. I just sat in an empty chair. That couldn't possibly be enough to... Protocol dictates, Seraphina announced, her voice cutting through the noise with ease, that we allow the accidental claimant to speak in their defense before the council convenes to determine if the bonding ritual shall proceed or if mercy shall be granted in the form of immediate death. My head snapped toward her. Death. Of course, she said, as if this were the most reasonable thing in the world. You cannot be permitted to leave with knowledge of our gathering, our identities, our existence. The choices are simple: bond with me and live among us forever, or die tonight with honor and have your body returned to your home with fabricated evidence of natural causes. She picked up her wine glass, filled with something too dark, too thick to be wine, and took a delicate sip. Personally, I find the bonding option far more entertaining, but the choice is technically yours. The world tilted. This couldn't be real. I was going to wake up in my apartment, I was going to... A hand fell on my shoulder, cold even through my jacket, and I looked up to find an older vampire standing behind me. He was tall, distinguished, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. Lord Callum, he said with heavy formality that dripped with barely concealed contempt, you will please rise and address the assembly. I'm not a lord, I managed, my voice embarrassingly shaky. I'm a graduate student. There's been a mistake. The mistake was yours, he replied coldly. But the consequences belong to us all. Rise. Seraphina made a small gesture with her hand, and I felt compelled, not magically but by sheer presence, to obey. I stood on legs that felt like water, turning to face the sea of undead nobility before me. They watched with expressions ranging from amusement to outrage to cold calculation. I saw the woman in burgundy near the middle of the table. She was smiling, but it was the smile of someone watching a gladiator about to enter the arena. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and tried again. I didn't know. I'm not familiar with your customs. In my defense, there was no marker at this seat. Because no marker should have been necessary, someone called out from the crowd. No one in their right mind would sit beside the Death Maiden uninvited. He's mortal, Christoph, another voice countered. How would he know? Which is precisely the point. A woman stood, her gown shimmering like oil slicks. Mortals do not belong at the equinox banquet. Their presence is permitted only by specific invitation and only in designated areas. The fact that he reached the head table at all suggests either incompetence in our security or conspiracy. The word sent a ripple through the crowd. Conspiracy. I saw expressions hardening, saw hands moving to rest on weapons I hadn't noticed before. Enough. Seraphina's single word silenced them all. She stood in one fluid motion, her armor catching the candlelight and throwing it back in sharp gleams. There is no conspiracy. I can smell the truth on him as clearly as I smell his fear, and oh, he is very afraid. She circled around the table to stand beside me, and I realized with a start that she was exactly my height. Somehow I'd expected her to be taller, but no, we stood eye to eye. He is exactly what he appears to be, a curious fool who wandered where he didn't belong and got more than he bargained for. She reached out and took my chin in her hand, turning my face toward hers. Her skin was cold as marble and just as hard. Look at me, Callum Archer. I had no choice. Her crimson eyes filled my vision and I felt something, a presence, pressing against my mind. Not violently but firmly, like fingers turning pages in a book. I tried to resist, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. He is a researcher, she announced to the hall, though her eyes never left mine. He studies us, our mythology, our folklore. He has spent years trying to understand creatures he believed were fiction. The invitation found its way to him through, a smile curved her lips. Through the mischief of my younger brother, it seems. Dear Lucian thought it would be amusing to invite a vampire scholar to an actual vampire banquet. The boy never did learn subtlety. She released my chin and I stumbled back a step, my head spinning. She'd been in my mind. She'd read my memories like they were words on a page. So we have established, no conspiracy, simply stupidity, both the mortals and my brothers. The question remains, what do we do with him? Seraphina turned to face the assembly, and I realized with a chill that she was enjoying this. The attention, the drama, the power. By law he has made a claim. Whether he intended to or not is irrelevant. The seat was taken. According to the Accords of the Third Covenant, established in 1347 following the Blood Summit, any person who seats themselves in the consort position beside an unbonded vampire noble is considered to have issued a bonding challenge. My lady, the silver-haired vampire behind me spoke up. With respect, that law was written for vampire challengers seeking to prove their worth. It was never intended to apply to mortals who stumble about in ignorance. And yet, Seraphina countered, the law does not specify species. It says any person. The language is clear. She was smiling now, and I realized with dawning horror that she was actually considering this. Not as an inconvenience to be dismissed, but as an opportunity. You can't seriously be considering bonding with a human, someone protested. You, of all vampires. The blood rose, bonded to mortal cattle? The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Seraphina moved, and the vampire who'd spoken was suddenly pinned against a pillar 20 feet away, her hand around his throat. I hadn't seen her move. One moment she was beside me, the next she was there, and the candles between flickered wildly in the wake of her passage. Choose your next words carefully, Marcus, she said softly, dangerously. I am princess of this court by blood and by blade. I have earned my titles in combat against enemies you cannot imagine. If I choose to bond with a human, a rock, or a particularly interesting shrub, that is my prerogative and mine alone. Are we clear? He nodded frantically and she released him, returning to my side in another blur of movement. The hall was silent again, but this time the silence held a different quality. Fear, respect, and something else, anticipation. I will bond with him, Seraphina announced, and those 5 words sealed my fate. Not because I am required to, but because I choose to. It has been suggested repeatedly by my father and the court that I should select a consort. I have refused every suitable vampire presented to me over the past 2 centuries. Perhaps, she looked at me and something flickered in those crimson eyes, something that might have been curiosity or might have been amusement. Perhaps it is time I try something different. She raised her voice, addressing the entire assembly. Let it be known, I, Seraphina Drakenmore, claim Callum Archer as my intended consort. The bonding will take place 1 month hence, on the night of the blood moon as tradition dictates. He will be given the choice on that night to complete the bond or refuse it. and accept death as the consequence of refusal. Until then he is under my protection. Any who harm him answer to me." The silver-haired vampire stepped forward. "My lady, he cannot stay in the mortal world knowing what he knows." "Agreed," Seraphina said calmly. "He will reside at Thornhaven Estate as my guest. His absence from the mortal world will be explained. I leave those details to the veil keepers." She looked at me again and I saw iron in her gaze. "You have 1 month to decide if you wish to become immortal and spend eternity at my side or die with honor. I suggest you use that time to understand exactly what you've gotten yourself into." Before I could respond, before I could protest or question or scream the 1,000 objections crowding my throat, she gestured to the silver-haired vampire. "Aldrich, see that he's given suitable quarters and appropriate attire. Make sure he understands the basic rules. Stay on the estate grounds, avoid the lower crypts, don't enter any room marked with blood sigils, and for the love of darkness, don't go wandering the gardens at night. The roses are carnivorous." "Carnivorous roses?" I repeated numbly. "This is a vampire estate, dear Callum," she said, amusement coloring her voice. "Did you expect petunias?" She turned to address the assembly once more. "Now, if we're quite finished with this evening's entertainment, I believe we have a banquet to attend. Please everyone be seated. Let us eat, drink, and celebrate the fact that our court has just become significantly more interesting." The banquet proceeded around me like a fever dream. Servants, pale, silent figures who moved with the same unsettling grace as the nobles, brought course after course of food I couldn't identify. Meats that were too rare, practically still bleeding. Fruits that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. And wine. So much wine, dark as blood, thick as syrup. I didn't touch any of it. My stomach had closed up tighter than a fist. Seraphina ate sparingly, taking small, precise bites and watching me with those unnerving crimson eyes whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Conversation flowed around us. Other nobles leaning across the table to discuss politics and territory disputes and things I didn't understand. Names of covens and bloodlines, references to events that happened centuries ago discussed as if they were recent news. "You should eat something," Seraphina said quietly, midway through what might have been the 7th or 8th course. "You're already pale enough. Any more and they'll mistake you for one of us." "I'm not hungry," I managed. "Fear has a way of killing appetite," she acknowledged. "Still, you're no good to me if you collapse from starvation before we reach your quarters." She made a subtle gesture, and one of the servants appeared at my elbow with a plate of something that actually looked normal: bread, cheese, fruit that didn't pulse. "This is safe for human consumption. Eat." It wasn't a request. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, my mind still spinning in circles trying to find an exit from this nightmare. There had to be a way out. Had to be an explanation, a loophole, something. "There isn't," Seraphina said, and I realized with fresh horror that she was still reading my thoughts. "I'm not actively intruding if it's any consolation. Your surface thoughts are simply very loud. Fear makes mortals broadcast." She took a sip of her wine, or whatever it was. "The law is clear and has been upheld for nearly 700 years. There is no loophole. There is no appeal. You sat in the consort seat. A claim was made. But you could release me from it," I said desperately, keeping my voice low so the other nobles wouldn't hear. "You're the one who was claimed. Surely you can just unclaim me?" "I could," she agreed. "But I won't." "Why?" The word came out sharper than I intended, edged with hysteria. "Why would you want a bond with someone who doesn't want it? Someone you don't even know?" She was quiet for a moment, swirling the contents of her glass and watching the candlelight refract through the liquid. When she spoke, her voice was softer than before, almost contemplative. "Do you know what it's like to live for 600 years, Callum? To watch empires rise and fall? To see everyone you might care about wither and die or become so ancient they forget what it means to feel anything at all? I have been a warrior my entire existence. I have perfected the art of violence, mastered combat in every form imaginable. I am respected, feared, powerful beyond measure." She looked at me and for just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like loneliness. "And I am unutterably bored." The admission hung between us like a confession in a church. Every vampire presented to me as a potential consort has been the same, she continued. Ancient, powerful, political. Chosen for bloodline compatibility and strategic advantage. They bore me to tears I can no longer cry. But you, a smile flickered across her face. You stumbled into my world by accident, sat in a seat that should have terrified you, and now you're eating cheese while surrounded by creatures who could tear you apart in seconds. You're either magnificently brave or magnificently stupid, and either option is more interesting than anything I've experienced in a century. So I'm entertainment? I asked, not sure if I should be offended or relieved. You're unexpected, she corrected. And I've learned to value the unexpected. She set down her glass with a decisive clink. Now finish your food. You'll need your strength. Aldrich will show you to your chambers, and tomorrow your education begins. Education. If you're to survive a month at Thornhaven Estate, you need to understand our ways. Our rules. Our dangers. She stood, and the entire hall fell silent again. Which brings me to my first lesson. Never assume safety within these walls. Thornhaven is beautiful, but it is not benign. Stay alert. Trust no one. And if you must venture anywhere alone, which I strongly advise against, carry iron and salt. Some of the older things in this place predate even vampires, and they do not honor my protection. With that cheerful warning, she swept from the hall, her armor catching the candlelight in brilliant flashes. The moment she was gone, the tension in the room eased noticeably, and conversations resumed at normal volume instead of the hushed whispers that had dominated since my catastrophic seating choice. Aldrich appeared at my shoulder. Lord Callum. If you'll come with me. I'm not a lord, I protested weakly, standing on shaking legs. You are betrothed to a princess, he replied, his tone making it clear he found this fact distasteful. That makes you a lord by courtesy if not by blood. Now come. Your chambers are prepared. I followed him from the banquet hall, acutely aware of the eyes tracking my movement. We walked through corridors that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them, past portraits whose eyes definitely moved, up staircases that spiraled in ways that defied geometry. Thornhaven Estate was vast beyond reason, and I had the distinct impression that it was alive in some fundamental way, aware of the parasite, me, moving through its stone veins. Here, Aldrich said finally, stopping before a heavy wooden door carved with intricate patterns. These will be your chambers for the duration of your stay. You'll find appropriate clothing in the wardrobes. Servants will bring meals at regular intervals. You are confined to this wing of the estate unless accompanied by myself, the princess, or another noble she designates. Is this understood? Am I a guest or a prisoner? I asked. His smile was cold. At Thornhaven Estate, there is often little difference. He opened the door and gestured me inside. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow your real trials begin. The chambers were obscenely luxurious. A massive four-poster bed dominated the space, draped with curtains of deep burgundy velvet. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with leather-bound volumes whose titles I couldn't read in the dim light. A fireplace crackled with flames that burned blue at their heart. Windows, tall, Gothic arched windows, looked out over grounds illuminated by moonlight that seemed too bright, too silver. I walked to the window and looked down. The estate gardens spread below, a maze of hedges and fountains and flowers that glowed faintly in the darkness. And there, moving among the roses, I saw shapes. Humanoid but wrong, their movements too fluid, their limbs too long. As I watched, one turned its head toward my window and I stumbled backward with a gasp. Its face had been a mass of petals and thorns, and where eyes should have been were blooming roses. Carnivorous roses. She hadn't been joking. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering. This was insane. All of it. I needed to think, needed to plan. There had to be a way out. I was a researcher, damn it. I solved problems through investigation and logic. Surely that same approach could free me from an engagement to an immortal warrior princess. The absurdity of that thought actually made me laugh, a sound edged with hysteria. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands, and tried to organize my spinning thoughts. Facts. What were the facts? 1. Vampires were real. All my years of research had been studying actual history, actual creatures, not mythology. 2. I had accidentally invoked some kind of ancient bonding law by sitting in the wrong chair. 3. I had 1 month to decide between becoming a vampire and spending eternity with Serafina Drakenmore, or dying. 4. There was a third option. There had to be. I just had to find it. I looked at the bookshelves, hope stirring in my chest. If anywhere had information about vampire law and customs, surely it would be here, in a room designated for a potential consort. I stood and approached the shelves, pulling down volume after volume. Most were in languages I didn't recognize, flowing scripts that looked almost Arabic, harsh runes that might have been Nordic, elegant characters that could have been ancient Chinese. But finally I found one in Latin, a language I'd learned for my research. Codex Sanguinum, the laws of blood and bond. My hands shook as I opened it. The pages were vellum, probably actual animal skin, and the ink was a dark russet that I tried very hard not to think about. I flipped through until I found a section marked De Consortio Eterno, concerning eternal consorts. I read through the night, the fire burning low and then flaring back to life without any intervention from me, as if the room itself wanted to help my research. What I learned didn't comfort me, but it did clarify my situation. The law was indeed absolute. Sitting in the consort seat constituted a claim that could only be resolved through bonding or death. But there were footnotes, subclauses, exceptions written in cramped text at the margins of pages. One caught my attention. If the claimant shall prove themselves unworthy through cowardice, dishonor, or fundamental incompatibility of spirit, the bond may be severed prior to the ceremony without consequence of death, provided both parties agree to the dissolution. Unworthy. That was it. That was my way out. If I could prove myself unsuitable as a consort to the deadliest vampire princess in existence, she would be forced to release me. And how hard could that be? I was a human academic who got winded climbing 3 flights of stairs. She was a 600-year-old warrior who'd killed demons. We were about as incompatible as 2 beings could possibly be. I just had to make her see it. As dawn light, or what passed for it in this place, began to filter through the windows, I finally allowed myself to collapse onto the bed. I had a plan. It was a terrible plan with 1,000 ways it could go catastrophically wrong, but it was something. Hope, thin and fragile as spider silk. I fell asleep still wearing my suit, my shoes, ready to run if the opportunity presented itself. Outside my window, the carnivorous roses swayed in a wind I couldn't hear, and somewhere deep in the bowels of Thornhaven Estate, Serafina Drakenmore smiled in her chambers, perfectly aware of everything her new intended had just read and planned. This was going to be far more entertaining than she'd expected. I woke to someone clearing their throat pointedly. My eyes flew open to find Aldrich standing at the foot of my bed, his expression suggesting he'd found a dead rat in his breakfast. "It is past noon," he informed me coldly. "The princess requests your presence in the training courtyard." Training courtyard? I sat up, my body protesting. I'd slept in my suit and everything ached. What training? Your education, Lord Callum. Did you imagine you would spend the month reading in your chambers? His tone suggested he found this possibility both typical and pathetic. The princess has decided that if you are to be her consort even temporarily, you must at least learn the basics of our world. Beginning with how not to immediately die in it. 20 minutes later, dressed in clothes that had appeared in my wardrobe overnight, dark trousers, a simple shirt, and a leather vest that looked distinctly medieval, I followed Aldrich through the labyrinthine corridors of Thornhaven to what he called the training courtyard. It was not a courtyard. It was an arena. The space was enormous, open to the sky but surrounded by high stone walls carved with what looked like protective runes. The ground was hard-packed earth, stained with what I desperately hoped was just rust. Weapon racks lined the walls, swords, spears, maces, things I didn't have names for that looked like they came from nightmares. And in the center of it all stood Serafina. She traded her formal armor for training gear, leather pants and a sleeveless top that revealed arms corded with lean muscle and marked with scars that stood out pale against her already pale skin. Her crimson hair was pulled back in a braid, and her eyes tracked my approach with predatory focus. "You're late," she said. I didn't know I had an appointment. At Thornhaven, you have whatever appointments I decide you have. She gestured to the weapon racks. Choose something. My stomach dropped. I'm not fighting you. Correct. You would be dead in approximately 4 seconds, and that would be a waste of a moderately interesting month. She pulled 2 wooden practice swords from a barrel near the wall. We're starting with the absolute basics. How to hold a weapon without dropping it, how to stand without falling over, how to block a blow without shattering every bone in your arm. Thrilling stuff. I'm not a fighter, I protested. I'm a researcher. I work with books, not swords. Yes, I'm aware. I can smell the dust and desperation on you. She tossed me one of the wooden swords. I fumbled the catch and it clattered to the ground. Her expression didn't change, but I felt my face burn with embarrassment. But if you're going to survive in our world, even for just a month, you need to understand violence. How it moves. How it thinks. You need to recognize a threat before it kills you. I picked up the sword, the wood heavy and awkward in my hands. And if I prove spectacularly bad at this? Then you prove spectacularly bad at it and we try something else tomorrow. She moved into a stance that looked casual but somehow radiated danger. But you might surprise yourself. Fear is an excellent motivator and you, Callum Archer, are very afraid. Now basic stance. Feet shoulder width apart, dominant foot slightly back, weight on the balls of your feet, knees soft. Show me. What followed were the most humiliating 3 hours of my life. Serafina was a patient teacher. I'll give her that. But patience from someone who could kill you with their pinky finger felt less like kindness and more like a cat playing with its food. She corrected my stance, adjusted my grip, demonstrated blocks and parries with fluid grace that made it look effortless. When I tried to replicate her movements, I looked like a drunk giraffe. Again, she said for what must have been the 100th time as I fumbled another basic parry. I'm trying, I gasped, sweat pouring down my face despite the cool air. Serafina didn't sweat. Didn't even breathe hard. Because she didn't breathe at all unless she chose to. No, you're thinking. Stop thinking. Your mind is your greatest weapon in most circumstances, but in combat it's a liability. React. Feel. Move. She demonstrated again, her wooden sword flowing through a series of movements like water. Your body knows what to do if you let it. You just have to get out of your own way. Easy for you to say. You've had 600 years to practice. True. Which means I remember what it's like to be terrible at this. Everyone starts terrible. She lowered her sword, studying me with those unsettling crimson eyes. Take a break. Drink water. Breathe. I collapsed onto a stone bench at the arena's edge, my entire body shaking with exhaustion. A servant appeared from nowhere with a pitcher of water and a cup. I drank gratefully, trying to slow my hammering heart. Serafina sat beside me, not close enough to crowd, but near enough that I was acutely aware of her presence. You did better than I expected, she said. I dropped the sword 6 times. Yes, but you picked it up 6 times. That's what matters. She leaned back, tilting her face toward the cloudy sky. Most humans I've known would have given up after the first fall. Pride is a powerful thing and humiliation kills it faster than any blade. I don't have much pride left to kill, I admitted. Not after last night. She laughed, a genuine sound that caught me off guard. No, I suppose not. Accidentally proposing to a vampire princess in front of 300 witnesses would humble anyone. The amusement faded from her face, replaced by something more serious. But you're still here. Still trying. That's more than I expected. Where else would I go? I asked bitterly. You said yourself I can't leave. You could have spent the day hiding in your chambers, reading your books, wallowing in despair. Instead you came to the training yard. You're making an effort. She turned those red eyes on me and I saw something in them I couldn't quite name. Respect? Interest? Why? Because I need you to see I'm unworthy. Because I'm trying to fail spectacularly enough that you'll release me from this insanity. But I couldn't say that. She might still be able to read my thoughts and that would ruin everything. Because if I only have a month to live, I might as well learn something interesting, I said instead, which was at least partially true. She smiled and this time it reached her eyes. A pragmatic approach. I approve. She stood, offering me her hand. Without thinking, I took it and she pulled me effortlessly to my feet. Her skin was cold and smooth like polished stone. Come. Enough swordplay for today. I want to show you something. We left the training courtyard, walking through gardens that looked beautiful and deadly in equal measure. The roses grew in wild profusion, their blooms ranging from deepest crimson to purest white, and I kept my distance after spotting what looked like bone fragments in the soil beneath them. The estate has been in my family for over 1,000 years, Serafina explained as we walked. Every generation adds something new. My father built the eastern wing. My eldest sister created the reflecting pools. My brother, the one who sent you the invitation, designed the hedge maze, though I advise you never to enter it. Things live there that even we don't fully understand. Comforting, I muttered. She led me to a tower I hadn't seen before, somehow hidden behind a fold in the architecture that shouldn't have been possible. We climbed spiral stairs that seemed to go on forever, my legs burning with exhaustion from the morning's training. Serafina moved effortlessly, barely touching the steps, and I hated her efficiency almost as much as I was terrified of her. At the top, we emerged onto a circular observation deck, and the view stole what little breath I had left. From here, I could see the entire estate spread below like a map in 3 dimensions. The castle with its many wings and towers. The gardens with their geometric patterns and wild growth. The forest beyond, dark and deep and older than any human civilization. And in the distance, just visible through morning mist, I could see a town? Buildings with smoking chimneys, streets with carts and movement. That's Raven's Hollow, Serafina said, following my gaze. A human settlement under our protection. They know what we are. They serve us in exchange for safety from other, less civilized supernatural threats. It's an old arrangement, dating back to the Black Death when we offered shelter to those willing to live in a monster's shadow. They choose to live near vampires? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. They choose survival. The world beyond our borders is more dangerous than you know, Callum. Vampires are not the only things that hunt in the dark. We're simply the most organized. She leaned against the stone parapet, her expression thoughtful. That's something humans rarely understand. You think of us as the ultimate predators and you're not wrong. But we're also the barrier between you and things that would devour your entire species in a matter of years. We maintain balance. We enforce rules. We keep the real nightmares locked away. That's a disturbing thought, I said. The truth often is. She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What were you researching? Before you came here? What aspect of vampire mythology fascinated you enough to dedicate years of your life to studying it?" The question caught me off guard. Why do you care? Because you're going to be here for a month, and I'm curious about what occupies your mind when you're not terrified for your life. She turned to face me fully. Humor me. I hesitated, then figured there was no harm in honesty. She could probably read it from my mind anyway. I was researching the evolution of vampire narratives across cultures. How the same basic concept, a creature that drinks blood and lives forever, manifests so differently depending on geography and time period. The Romanian Strigoi, the Chinese Jiangshi, the Malaysian Penanggalan. I wanted to understand if there was a common truth beneath all the variations. And what did you conclude? That either there are many different species all lumped under the same label, or, I trailed off, uncertain. Or, she prompted. Or vampires are incredibly adaptable. Shape themselves to fit the fears and expectations of whatever culture they're infiltrating. Become what they need to be to survive. I looked at her. Which is it? Serafina smiled, slow and dangerous. Yes. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm giving you today. You want to understand us? Earn it. Learn. Observe. Survive. She pushed off from the parapet. Come. I've arranged for you to meet some of the other residents of Thornhaven. Not all of them are vampires, and you should understand what else shares these walls with you. As we descended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking. And despite my plans to prove myself unworthy, despite my desperation to escape this nightmare, I felt a small, treacherous spark of curiosity about what came next. Serafina was terrifying, yes. Dangerous, absolutely. But she was also the most interesting person I'd ever met, and that was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. The library of Thornhaven Estate made my university's collection look like a grocery store pamphlet rack. It occupied 3 floors of the southern tower, with spiral staircases connecting levels and rolling ladders providing access to shelves that stretched 20 feet high. Books in every language imaginable lined the walls, interspersed with scrolls, tablets, and bound manuscripts that looked like they predated the printing press by several millennia. But it wasn't the books that made me stop in the doorway and stare. It was the person reading them. She sat in an oversized leather chair near a massive fireplace, a book open in her lap and at least a dozen more floating in the air around her, their pages turning themselves as she read. She was young, or at least appeared young, maybe 16 or 17, with dark skin, hair styled in intricate braids woven with silver thread, and eyes that glowed a soft amber. She wore modern clothes, jeans and an oversized sweater, which somehow made her more surreal rather than less. "Callum," Serafina said, gesturing me forward, "meet Nadia. She's one of our resident scholars and the closest thing Thornhaven has to a librarian. Also, she's a witch." The floating books snapped shut simultaneously and dropped onto a nearby table with a thud. Nadia looked up, her amber eyes focusing on me with unsettling intensity. "The accidental fiancé. I've heard about you." Her accent was British, crisp and educated. "You're the first interesting thing to happen around here in ages." "So I keep being told," I said dryly. "Should I be flattered or concerned that I'm apparently everyone's entertainment?" "Both," she said cheerfully, standing and approaching with a fluid grace that made me think of dancers. "Definitely both." She circled me slowly, studying me like a specimen under glass. "Mortal. Educated. No magical ability whatsoever. Honestly, you're practically invisible to supernatural senses. That's probably how you made it to the high table without being stopped. The wards simply didn't register you as a threat." "Because I'm not a threat," I said. "I'm a graduate student." "Those aren't mutually exclusive categories," Nadia replied. "The most dangerous people I've known have been scholars. They understand how things work, which means they understand how to break them." She returned to her chair, and the books rose again, resuming their floating dance. "But that's not why Serafina brought you here. She wants me to explain the estate hierarchy. The species intermix. All the complicated social dynamics you'll need to navigate to not die horribly in the next month." Serafina settled into another chair, looking amused. "I thought it best you hear it from someone closer to your age. I've been told my explanations can be intimidating." "Terrifying, you mean?" Nadia corrected. "You're terrifying. Own it." She turned her attention back to me. "Right. Thornhaven Estate crash course. Pay attention because this literally might save your life." She waved her hand and one of the floating books flew to hover between us. Its pages flipped open to reveal an illustrated diagram of the estate, with different sections marked in various colors. First, the vampires. They're the ruling class here, obviously. You've met Serafina. She's third in line to inherit control of the entire northern covens, which is like being third in line for a throne that rules over several countries' worth of territory. Her father, Lord Matthias, is the eternal king, though he mostly keeps to himself these days. Been alive for over 2,000 years and is generally done with everyone's nonsense. 2,000 years, I repeated faintly. Give or take. Records get fuzzy after the first millennium. Nadia flipped to another page. Then you've got your various noble vampires, ancient families with complicated bloodlines and even more complicated politics. They mostly hate each other but maintain a fragile peace because Lord Matthias will personally destroy anyone who starts internal warfare. Then there are the younger vampires, anything under 200 years old. They do most of the actual work around here: guard duty, estate management, liaison with human settlements. And you? I asked. Where do witches fit into this hierarchy? We're independent contractors, Nadia said with a grin. I'm here because Thornhaven has the best magical library on the continent, and Seraphina's father gave me unrestricted access in exchange for maintaining the estate's protective wards. Mutually beneficial arrangement. I get knowledge, they get security. Witches aren't bound to serve vampires, we have our own power structures. But many of us work with them because they're less annoying than dealing with human witch hunters. Witch hunters are still a thing? This day kept getting more surreal. Oh, very much so. Just better funded and equipped with modern technology now. She waved the concern away. But that's a different lesson. Let's move on to the others who live here. The book's pages flipped again, showing illustrations of creatures I recognized from my research and several I didn't. Lycanthropes, werewolves, have a pack that lives in the estate's northern forest under protection treaty. They're technically autonomous but swear fealty to Lord Matthias in exchange for territory. You probably won't encounter them much, they keep to themselves. Then there are the Fae. Her expression darkened. The Fae are dangerous in ways vampires aren't. Vampires are predators, but they're straightforward. They want blood, they drink blood. Simple. Fae operate on rules so complex and contradictory that even they can't keep track sometimes. Never thank them, never accept gifts, never make promises, and for the love of magic, never tell them your full name. They will use it against you. Noted, I said, mentally adding another layer to my growing terror. Any Fae currently in residence? 3, Seraphina said. They serve as ambassadors from the Court of Dusk. Annoying but politically necessary. I'll make sure you're never alone with them. Then there are the ghosts, Nadia continued. Thornhaven is old enough that it's accumulated quite a collection. Most are harmless, just residual energy trapped in loops. But a few are sentient and can interact with the physical world. If you see a woman in a white dress crying in the East Wing, ignore her. She's been doing that for 3 centuries and she gets violent if you try to help. If you see a child with a red ball, run. Immediately. That one isn't a ghost. It's something else that looks like a ghost, and you don't want to find out what it actually is. My head was spinning. This is insane. All of it. This is Tuesday at Thornhaven, Nadia corrected cheerfully. You'll get used to it. Probably. Maybe. She closed the floating book with a gesture, and it drifted back to the shelf. The important thing to remember is that everything here operates on rules. Supernatural creatures are bound by laws, ancient ones that predate human civilization. Learn the rules, follow them, and you'll likely survive. Break them out of ignorance and... She made a throat-cutting gesture. Very reassuring, I muttered. I wasn't trying to reassure you, she said. I was trying to educate you. There's a difference. She stood again, approaching me with suddenly serious eyes. But here's the real lesson, Callum. The one that matters most. Seraphina could have let you die. The law gives her that option. She chose not to. That means something in this world. It means you're under her protection, which is one of the most powerful safeguards you could possibly have. But it also means you're her responsibility. If you screw up, it reflects on her. So don't screw up. I looked at Seraphina, who'd been silent during most of Nadia's explanation. No pressure though, I said weakly. Consider it motivation to pay attention, Seraphina replied. She stood, moving with that fluid grace that made her look like she was floating. Nadia, make him a reading list. History, law, basic supernatural etiquette. If he's going to be here for a month, he should understand where here actually is. Already done, Nadia said, snapping her fingers. A stack of books flew from the shelves to land in a neat pile on a nearby table. That should keep you busy for a few days. Fair warning. Some of them are in Latin and Old English. I assumed from your academic background that wouldn't be a problem. It's not, I confirmed, eyeing the stack with mixed trepidation and interest. Despite everything, despite the terror and the impossible situation, my researcher's instincts were firing. This was unprecedented access to supernatural knowledge. If I survived this, the dissertation I could write would be worthless, I realized with a crash. Because I could never publish it, never share it. This knowledge came with a blood price, and that price was silence or death. Seraphina was watching me, and I realized she'd followed my train of thought. Yes, she said quietly. This is the burden of seeing behind the veil. You can never unknow what you now know. Never return to comfortable ignorance. Whether you choose to stay or, she didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. I should get started on the reading, I said, desperate to change the subject, to do something that felt normal and safe. Tomorrow, Serafina decided. You've had enough education for one day. Tonight, you'll dine with my family. My stomach dropped. Your family. As in, my father, the eternal king. My two sisters. My irritating brother who caused this whole situation. My uncle and aunt. Various cousins. She smiled at my expression. They're all very curious to meet the human who accidentally proposed to me. It should be enlightening. That's one word for it, I muttered. As we left the library, Nadia called after us, Callum. One more thing. I turned back. The choice you'll have to make at the end of the month, bonding or death. It's not as simple as it sounds. Bonding doesn't just mean marriage or partnership. It means becoming vampire. Dying and being reborn into immortality, your humanity burned away forever. Just make sure you understand what you'd be giving up. The weight of her words followed me through the corridors like a physical thing. Becoming vampire. Dying. Being reborn. I'd spent years studying vampire transformation mythology, the rituals, the symbolism, the cultural interpretations. But now, faced with the reality, it wasn't academic anymore. It was a death sentence either way. Die and stay dead, or die and come back as something else. Something that would live forever but would never again be human. I thought of my life before this. My small apartment. My research. My plans for the future. All of it felt impossibly distant, like remembering someone else's memories. You're thinking very loudly again, Serafina observed as we walked. Sorry? It's been a lot to process. It has, she agreed. But you're handling it better than most would. You haven't completely broken down, haven't tried to run, haven't begged and pleaded. She glanced at me. You're stronger than you think you are. Or more in shock than I realize. Perhaps both. We reached my chambers and she stopped at the door. Dinner is at 8. Dress formally. And Callum? Her crimson eyes held mine. My family will test you. They'll push and prod, trying to understand what kind of creature you are. Show them the same strength you've shown me today. Don't let them see fear even if you feel it. Fake it till I make it? Exactly. A hint of warmth entered her expression. You might actually survive this month after all. She left me there, and I entered my chambers feeling wrung out and overwhelmed. The books Nadia had prepared were waiting on my desk, delivered by silent servants or magic, I didn't know which. I should have started reading immediately. Should have used every moment to learn, to prepare. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out over the impossible gardens, the ancient forests, the world I'd stumbled into and couldn't escape. 1 month. 30 days to decide if I wanted to die or stop being human. And the most terrifying part was that I was no longer entirely certain which option scared me more. Aldrich arrived precisely at 8 to escort me to dinner. I dressed in the formal attire provided. Another suit, this one black with subtle embroidery at the cuffs that looked like silver thorns. I felt like I was going to my own funeral, which, given the circumstances, wasn't entirely inaccurate. Some advice, Lord Callum, Aldrich said as we walked, his tone suggesting he was offering it against his better judgment. Lord Matthias respects directness. Don't try to flatter or manipulate, he's seen every trick in existence. Lady Evangelina, the eldest sister, will try to provoke you, ignore her. Lord Lucian, the brother who sent your invitation, treats everything as a joke. Don't take the bait. And Lady Celeste, the middle sister, is the most dangerous because she seems kind. She's not. None of them are. Except Serafina? I asked hopefully. Especially Serafina, he corrected. She's simply more honest about it. The dining room was smaller than the banquet hall but no less impressive. A table of dark wood polished to mirror brightness stretched beneath a chandelier that held hundreds of candles. The walls were covered in portraits, presumably ancestors, all with those same unsettling red or amber eyes, watching with predatory interest. 5 vampires were already seated. I recognized Serafina immediately. She changed into a gown that matched her armor's blue-black coloring, elegant and severe. She sat at her father's right hand. Lord Matthias Drakenmore sat at the head of the table, and the weight of his presence made everyone else in the room seem diminished. He was tall, with silver-white hair and eyes like frozen blood. He wore simple dark robes, no ornamentation because he didn't need it. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. 2,000 years of existence had carved away everything unnecessary, leaving only essential danger. To his left sat a woman who could have been Seraphina's twin, except her hair was midnight black and her smile was all sharp edges. Lady Evangelina, I presumed. She watched me enter with undisguised amusement. Beside her was a younger man, or younger appearing at least, with copper-red hair and green eyes that danced with mischief. He raised his wine glass to me in a mock toast. Lord Lucian, the architect of my doom. The last woman was harder to read. She had honey-gold hair and delicate features, with eyes that seemed blue until the light caught them and revealed they were actually pale crimson. She smiled at me warmly, which somehow made her more frightening than the others' open hostility. Lady Celeste. Lord Callum Archer, Lord Matthias said, his voice like stone grinding against stone. Sit. It wasn't a request. I took the empty seat between Seraphina and Lucian, acutely aware that I was surrounded by creatures who could tear me apart in seconds. So, Lucian began cheerfully, how's the existential dread treating you? Sleeping well? Eating? Not screaming into pillows at night? Lucian, Seraphina said quietly, and he subsided, though his grin remained. Lord Matthias studied me with eyes that seemed to see through flesh and bone to whatever counted as my soul. My daughter tells me you're a researcher. That you study vampire mythology. Yes, my lord, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Cultural anthropology with a focus on supernatural folklore. And how do you find the reality compares to the mythology? Was a test. I could feel the weight of everyone's attention on me. The mythology is incomplete. It captures fragments of truth but misses the essential nature. The cultural variations suggest either multiple species or remarkable adaptability. The power structures are more sophisticated than folklore suggests. And the political implications are entirely absent from popular narratives. Something that might have been approval flickered across Lord Matthias's face. A measured answer. Most humans either grovel or pontificate. You do neither. Groveling won't change my situation, I said. And pontificating would be absurd given how little I actually know. Evangelina laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Oh, I like him. He's self-aware. Can we keep him father? That decision belongs to Seraphina, Lord Matthias replied. Though I confess, I'm curious about her choice to uphold the bonding claim rather than simply kill him and be done with it. Every vampire at the table turned to look at Seraphina. She met their gazes calmly, taking a sip of her wine before responding. He interests me. That's reason enough. Is it? Celeste's voice was gentle, almost concerned. Sister, you've rejected every suitable vampire presented to you for 2 centuries. Now you choose a human who stumbled into our world by accident? One who will either die in a month or require transformation, becoming your eternal responsibility? It seems impulsive. I'm never impulsive, Seraphina said. Everything I do is calculated. Then what's the calculation here? Evangelina challenged. What value does he provide? He's mortal, Seraphina said simply. He sees time differently than we do. To him, a month is significant. To us it's a blink. He's lived barely 3 decades, yet he's dedicated years to understanding creatures he believed were fiction. That kind of passion, that dedication to knowledge for its own sake. When was the last time any of us felt that? When was the last time anything mattered enough to devote our limited attention to it? The table fell silent. I realized with a start that Seraphina wasn't just defending her choice to them. She was explaining it to herself. You're bored, Lord Matthias said, not accusatory but observational. The problem with immortality. Eventually you've seen everything, done everything, become so skilled at existence that nothing challenges you anymore. Yes, Seraphina admitted. And then a mortal researcher sits in my consort seat, looks me in the eye, and instead of begging for mercy he asks about species variation and cultural adaptation. He's terrified, absolutely terrified, but he's still curious, still trying to understand. When was the last time I encountered anyone, mortal or immortal, with that kind of courage? Courage or stupidity, Lucian murmured. Often the same thing, Serafina replied. The point is he's unexpected. Novel. For the first time in decades, I'm genuinely interested in how something will unfold. So he's entertainment, Evangelina said flatly. A pet project to stave off your boredom. If that's how you want to frame it. Serafina's tone suggested she didn't particularly care how her sister framed it. I should have been offended. Should have been outraged at being discussed like an object, a curiosity, a temporary distraction for a bored immortal. But instead I felt something unexpected, understanding. Because wasn't that exactly what my research had been? My own attempt to find something interesting enough to dedicate my limited time to? The only difference was I'd thought I was studying mythology, not auditioning for eternal partnership with one of the subjects. Lord Matthias turned his attention back to me. You've been very quiet during this discussion of your fate. Do you have nothing to say? I took a breath, remembering Serafina's advice. Show strength. Don't let them see fear. Only that I understand the position I'm in. I made a mistake born of ignorance and the consequences are mine to bear. But I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not to make those consequences easier. I'm human. Mortal. Completely out of my depth. If that makes me unworthy of bonding with your daughter, then so be it. But I won't grovel, and I won't lie about what I am to save myself. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Then Lord Matthias smiled, actually smiled, and it transformed his face from stern to almost kind. You'll do, he said simply. Serafina, if you're determined to proceed with this, you have my blessing. And Callum Archer, if you survive the month and choose transformation, you'll have my support in that as well. Father, Evangelina protested, you can't seriously approve of. I can and I do. His voice carried absolute authority. How many centuries have we tried to guide Serafina toward appropriate matches? How many ancient vampires have courted her, only to be rejected? If a mortal academic succeeds where our finest warriors failed, that tells me something important. We've been looking for the wrong qualities. Servants began bringing food, actual food for me and dark, thick drinks for the vampires. The tension eased slightly, though I remained hyper-aware that I was dining with apex predators who were being civil by choice, not necessity. Lucian leaned toward me conspiratorially. For what it's worth, I really didn't think you'd actually show up to the banquet. The invitation was meant to be a joke. Send it to a random vampire mythology expert, see if curiosity overcomes sense. I bet Evangelina a considerable sum that you wouldn't come. Sorry to make you lose your bet, I said dryly. Oh, I'm not sorry at all. This is infinitely more entertaining than I imagined. He raised his glass again. To happy accidents and unexpected engagements. Celeste spoke up, her gentle voice cutting through the levity. Callum, may I ask you something personal? Every instinct screamed that I should say no, but I nodded. If, at the end of the month, you choose transformation, choose to become vampire and bond with Serafina, what would you miss most about being human? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on surviving, on finding a way out, that I hadn't really considered what I'd actually be giving up. I don't know. I haven't thought about it. Think about it now, she pressed. Sunlight? Mortality? The simple fact of being alive rather than undead? What defines your humanity? I looked down at my plate, at food I could taste and digest, at hands that were warm with circulating blood. What would I miss? Time, I said finally. The pressure of it. The knowledge that every moment matters because there are only so many. You said Serafina sees a month as a blink, but to me it's significant. Every day means something when you know you have a limited supply. Immortality sounds appealing until you consider what you lose. Urgency. Purpose. The drive to accomplish things before time runs out. And yet, Celeste said softly, humans waste so much of that precious time. Procrastinate, delay, assume they have more days than they do. Is your time really so well used? Probably not, I admitted. But at least we have the potential to value it. What drives you after centuries? What makes you get up at sunset when you've already experienced everything worth experiencing? Celeste smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That, Callum, is the question that haunts every immortal who lives long enough. What indeed? The dinner continued, conversation flowing around subjects I barely understood. Coven politics, territorial disputes with werewolf packs, negotiations with Fey courts. I ate mechanically, observing the family dynamics with a researcher's eye despite my circumstances. Lord Matthias was clearly the anchor, the source of authority everyone orbited around. Evangelina was competitive, constantly testing, looking for weaknesses. Lucian was chaos barely contained, intelligent but undisciplined. Celeste was the most subtle, asking questions that seemed innocent but cut deep. And Serafina. Serafina was respected in a way the others weren't. When she spoke, they listened. When she made decisions, they didn't question. She was, I realized, exactly what she'd claimed, the deadliest among them. Not because she was the oldest or strongest, though she might be, but because she'd earned every ounce of respect through action. The titles, the reputation, the deference. All of it was built on 600 years of being excellent at violence. And I was supposed to be her consort. The absurdity of it hit me again, and I must have made some sound, a laugh or a gasp, I wasn't sure, because everyone looked at me. Something amusing? Evangelina asked archly. Just the situational irony, I said. A week ago, my biggest concern was whether my dissertation committee would approve my methodology. Now I'm having dinner with the Eternal King and contemplating whether I want to die as a human or live as a vampire. It's a significant shift in perspective. Lucian burst out laughing. I like him, he declared. He's got a sense of humor. That's rare among mortals we don't immediately kill. Low bar, I muttered, and that made even Evangelina crack a smile. By the time dessert was served, some elaborate confection I couldn't identify, the atmosphere had shifted from hostile evaluation to something almost approaching acceptance. I was still clearly an outsider, still the strange mortal who disrupted their world, but I was no longer seen as an immediate problem to be solved. Lord Matthias stood as the meal concluded, and everyone fell silent. Callum Archer, you have 1 month to decide your fate. Use it well. Learn our ways. Understand what you're choosing between. And if, at the end, you decide to join us in immortality, know that you will be welcomed, not as an outsider who stumbled in, but as family who chose to stay. He left without waiting for a response, his presence receding like a tide. The others followed in order of rank, until only Serafina and I remained at the table. That went better than expected, she said. Your family is terrifying. Yes. But they're also fair in their way. You proved yourself tonight, showed intelligence, courage, self-awareness. Those qualities matter to us more than strength or supernatural ability. She stood, offering her hand. Come. I want to show you one more thing before you retire. I took her cold hand and let her lead me from the dining room, through corridors I didn't recognize, until we reached a balcony overlooking the estate's western gardens. The moon was full and impossibly bright, painting everything in silver light. This is where I come when the weight of immortality gets too heavy, Serafina said quietly. When I need to remember why I choose to continue existing. She gestured to the view. Thornhaven is beautiful. Dangerous, yes. Deadly, absolutely. But beautiful. And after 600 years, beauty still matters. That's how I know I haven't completely lost my humanity, or whatever vampires have instead of humanity. The capacity to appreciate something purely because it pleases the eye. I looked at the gardens, at the way moonlight caught the rose petals and made them glow, at the ancient trees swaying in wind I couldn't feel from here. She was right. It was beautiful. Terrifyingly, impossibly beautiful. Thank you, I said. For tonight. For giving me a chance to meet your family, to understand this world better. Don't thank me yet, she replied. You still have 29 days to survive. And tomorrow your real education begins. What's tomorrow? She smiled, and in the moonlight her fangs caught the silver glow. Tomorrow you learn what we actually do with eternity. Tomorrow you see why vampires aren't just predators but protectors. Tomorrow you meet the real monsters. And with that ominous promise, she left me on the balcony,